Now we're live.
Okay, I'm coming in okay.
Yeah.
Oh man, but
Alrighty,
now,
folks. How are we doing today? Um, this is a Monday night debate. I know everybody's tired from work, but we've been planning this, and it seems like there's never a good time to do this. So we do it on a Monday. It's what it
yeah,
is. Okay, welcome. So today we have Shadi, who's going to take on Christopher Lockwood from Sword of Truth Apologetics, and the topic today is regarding the Gospels of the Bible, whether they're written by their claimed author or not. Obviously, Christopher Lockwood is going to take the affirmative position, and Shadi is going to challenge that. And Shadi, just real quick, what sect of Islam are you?
I'm a Sunni Muslim.
You're Sunni. Okay, cool. All right, so Sunni Muslim versus Evangelical Christianity defense of the Bible. So the debate format tonight, we have 10 minutes opening for each of these gentlemen. Then we have 5 minutes rebuttal from each side of the opening statement. We will then have 15 minutes of cross-examination from each of them. Then we get 5 minutes closing. And after that, we will have Q&A. Okay. With that said, let me go ahead and allow you guys to see the timer. Actually, I would just use the timer. Chris,
yeah.
you challenge the debate, all right? So whenever you're ready, your 10 minutes begins when you start talking.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are told something very confidently. The Gospels are anonymous. Their names were added later. They are late legendary developments. I've heard this for long enough. Okay. The claim sounds modern, it sounds academic, it sounds informed, but it collapses under historical scrutiny. Let's apply the historical method, the same method applied to every other Greco Roman document out there. We can't do special pleading. We can't change the rules for the Gospels and then apply something else to everything else. I think we would all agree. So let's apply that historical method, not theology, not church authority, not tradition for tradition's sake, but standard criteria historians use for every ancient document. First, what do we actually possess? We possess four texts, okay? Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Luke, Gospel of John. Every surviving manuscript we have, every single one that preserves the title, attributes these works to the same four individuals. Not some manuscripts, not later medieval copies, all of them. There is no competing attribution tradition. Let me repeat that. In the entire manuscript tradition of the four Gospels, there is not a single manuscript attributing Matthew to Peter or John to Thomas or Mark to Andrew. That is historically extraordinary because when works are truly anonymous in antiquity, names compete. Okay. Second, early external testimony. This is part of the historical method. Okay. What do we have? By the early second century, we already have named attributions. Around 110 to 130 AD, Papias of Hierapolis writes, Matthew compiled the sayings in the Hebrew dialect. Mark, having become Peter's interpreter, wrote down accurately what he remembered. Critics will say, Papias isn't perfect. Fine, but Papias is early. And more importantly, he is not alone. Around 180 AD, Irenaeus, who was a student of Polycarp, who knew John, that's apostolic chain, explicitly names all four authors and connects them to apostolic authority. This is not late medieval theology. This is second century testimony. If the Gospels were floating anonymously for generations, where's the confusion? Where's the debate over authorship in the second century? It doesn't exist. And people, remember, the church debated things very, very fervently, okay? From the fake gospels that would come in there. I mean, we were more of an exclusionary debater, in the early church than we were an inclusionary. Okay, you don't see any debates in the early church on these named authors. Okay, and then third, the why these names problem. Okay, if the early church fabricated names to give authority, they chose very strange names. Okay, let's look carefully. Mark is not an apostle. I mean, why wouldn't you use a name with much more power if you're trying to fabricate and make something, appear better? Luke is not an apostle. If you're inventing authority, why not Peter? Why not James? Why not Thomas? Why not Andrew? Instead, two of the four gospels are attached to non-apostles. That makes no sense as a propaganda move. Mark is tied to Peter. Luke is tied to Paul. There are realistic memory transmission chains, not legendary upgrades. Fabrication tends to exaggerate. Gospel titles do not. And that has the twist that truth has. Fourth, internal evidence of eyewitness connection. Let's talk about texture. The Gospel of Mark preserves embarrassing details about Peter, including his denial. Legends glorify founders. The Gospels preserve their failures. Women discover the empty tomb. In first century Jewish culture, women were not considered reliable legal witnesses. If you're inventing a resurrection legend, you do not build it on female testimony, that's for sure, unless you're reporting what actually happened. Luke opens his gospel like a Greco-Roman historian, being investigated everything carefully from the beginning. It's historiographical language. John closes his gospel by saying, "This is the disciple who testifies to these things, the one who Jesus loved." That is eyewitness claim language. These are not myth formulas. They read like memory documents. Fifth, the early manuscript circulation, again, a part of the historical method. We possess early papyri, such as Gospel of John, fragment P52, commonly dated around 125 to 150 AD. That fragment was found in Egypt. Think about what that implies. For John's Gospel to be circulating in Egypt by 125 to 150, it had to be written earlier, copied, distributed, and collected. That process does not happen overnight, which means we are already within living memory of the apostolic generation. This is not third century legend building. This is early first century transmission. And sixth, compare with the truly anonymous works out there. In antiquity, many works lack internal author claims. For example, Histories does not self-identify as I Herodotus, yet no one argues it was anonymous folklore for a century. Why? Because external attestation and consistent manuscript attribution established his authorship. That is the same situation we have with the Gospels. If historians accept attribution in Greco-Roman works based on early tradition and manuscript uniformity, consistency demands the same standard here. And seventh, the argument of silence, which my opponent is going to bring tonight, you're going to hear it again and again. The argument of silence fails. It's a fallacy. The critics say the Gospels don't name their authors inside the text. Correct. Neither do many ancient works. Titles were often attached externally. The question is not, do they self-identify? The question is the attribution early, consistent, and uncontested? In the case of the Gospels, yes, yes, and yes. Now, for the burden of proof, how am I doing on time? Good on time. If someone claims the names were added later, like my opponent Shadi, he's got to show three things. He's got to show a competing early attribution, because all truly anonymous works have competing attributions. Evidence of a period of anonymity. You're not going to find that, okay? A documented moment where names were assigned. If names were assigned, according to him, they were anonymous and they were fabricated later, I want to know the exact moment when those things happened, or you're just arguing without evidence. We have none of these. Instead, what we have is early, geographically widespread, consistent attribution. That's not how legends behave. This is how preserved memory behaves. In conclusion, the claim that the Gospels are anonymous, late legends, is not the default historical position. It's a skeptical hypothesis. And like any hypothesis, it must be demonstrated, okay? If we're going to apply the scientific method. When we apply the historical method, early attestation, do I have it? Yes. Manuscript consistency? Yes. Lack of competing traditions? Yes. Plausible transmission chains? Yes. Internal eyewitness indicators? Yes. The simplest explanation is the traditional one. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John stand behind these texts in the way early Christianity consistently claimed. You don't have to believe they're inspired, but historically speaking, dismissing them as anonymous folklore does not fit the evidence. Okay, how much time do I have here? About 3 minutes. We're going to go into a few. Here's some external attestation evidence. Okay. I have, let's see what I have here. Okay. I have, Papias of Hierapolis, 60 to 130. Mark, having become the interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately whatever he remembered. About Matthew. Matthew composed the Logia in the Hebrew dialect, and each interpreted them as he was able. You have Irenaeus, 130 to 202, against heresies. He wrote, Matthew issued a written gospel among the Hebrews. Mark, the disciple and interpreter of Peter, handed down in writing what he had been preached by Peter. Luke, the companion of Paul, recorded in a book the gospel preached by him. Afterwards, John, the disciple of the Lord, published the gospel by his residing at Ephesus. He gives all four names, gives relationships to the apostles from someone connected to John through Polycarp. It's very early in historical terms. And, they're going to try to argue and kind of use the ignorance of the audience that, a lot of people don't know his historiography. 100 years, 150 years is very, very early in historical tradition, okay? And what Papias said, Papias claims to have received the information from those who knew the elders. He explicitly connects Mark to Peter and Matthew to authorship. This is within living memory of the apostolic generation. I got multiple attestation. And folks, what multiple attestation is the more people that attest the same thing, the higher the probability is that it's true. Okay. So let's look at the multiple attestation and see how the Gospels do. Well, they do very, very well. Let me tell you. All right. So we go all the way up, and external multiple attestation: Papias of Hierapolis, Irenaeus, Origen. Affirms Matthew as first Gospel written by the apostle. Jerome affirms Matthean authorship in Hebrew origin tradition. No competing author has ever proposed in the first 400 years of Christianity. That silence is powerfully historically. You have, the criterion of embarrassment, like I said. You have Matthew as a tax collector. I mean, that's kind of something that was tax collectors were looked at as traitors back then. You have Mark the Evangelist, not an apostle, not an eyewitness of Jesus, and he was associated with Peter. I mean, you would have probably put somebody stronger there, at that time. And the explanatory power is very important too. The gospel authorship, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, explains early universal attribution. It explains internal narrative structure. It explains eyewitness texture, explains embarrassing material, and explains lack of rival claims. So it explains everything that we see in history. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John explain better than any rival attribution that my opponent's going to be able to give tonight. All right. Thanks, guys. And good luck, Shadi. See what you got.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for your opening statement. Shadi, now it's your turn. I am going to share my screen. So hold on a second. There we go. Now let's do this. And I'm going to make sure, give me a second. I want to make sure that the audience can see this. Audience, can you guys see? Yeah, there we go. All right, Shadi, whenever you're ready, man, just let me know you're ready to go on to the next part, and I'll just say next or something, and I'll do it. Let me start the timer though.
Thank you so much.
All right. All right, go ahead.
Good evening, and thank you guys for having me. Let me know when you're ready, and we'll start the timer.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to start with positive proof why these Gospels were anonymous. For one, John and Peter were unlettered. Acts 4:13 tells us that they were agromotai. They were illiterate and commoners, and people were shocked when they were speaking up because of the way that they were carrying themselves. This is the literal interpretation. The word agromotai just means someone who doesn't know the letters. This is testified by John Chrysostom, a church father, in the homilies on John chapter 2. He says that Luke testifies this when he writes that not only was he speaking here about John, not only was he ignorant, but that he was absolutely unlettered, 4 and 13. This man was ignorant and to the last degree of ignorance, who never learned the letters. John Chrysostom, homilies on John chapter 2 again. Let's go to the next slide. Galilean Jews, they didn't speak Greek fluently. This is seen in Josephus and against Apion. Josephus tells us that he made use of some persons to assist him in learning the Greek tongue. By these means, he composed the histories of those transactions. This is the man that wrote the Josephine histories, antiquities of the Jews, and against Apion. He was a Jewish nobility man. He was in the upper echelon, and yet he struggled with Greek, even though he lived in Galilee, and he was a Jewish nobleman, like I was saying. He came from a rich class of people, socially. He says also the people that he sold these books to were men that learned Greek philosophy and Greek concepts, and the men that he names that he sold his book to were Julius Archelaus, Herod, a person of great gravity, and King Agrippa himself. These are Jewish noblemen. The Bar Ilan University estimated that some towns, some rural towns in Galilee, the literacy rate in those dropped below 1%. This is according to Catherine Hager in her book, Jewish Literacy in Ancient Palestine, page 35. Let's go to the next slide. John was martyred early, so he couldn't have written the Gospel of John. Papias, in his second book, according to Philip of Side, wrote that John the theologian and James, his brother, were killed by the Jews, fragment 4.6. Mark 10:35 through 38 tells us about this martyrdom, and it alludes to it when he says that James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus, and they asked him to be on his right and left side, and he promised them, and he told them, "Can you drink the cup I drink?" They said yes. And so he said, "You will drink the cup that I drink, and you will be baptized with the baptism I experience," which is the cup of suffering, the cup of wrath, and the baptism of death. Let's go to the next slide. Peter died before Mark was written. This is according to Eusebius in Against Heresies, Book 3, Chapter 1. He says that Matthew wrote a gospel among the Hebrews in their own dialect. Paul and Peter were preaching in Rome and laying, this is according to Irenaeus in Against Heresies. He said that Peter and Paul were preaching in Rome and laying the foundations of the church. And after their departure, Mark, the disciple and interpreter of Peter, also did hand down to us what has been preached by Peter. Next slide. According to M.D. Golder, Midrash and Lection on Matthew, page 474, about half of the Gospel of Matthew consists of passages generally acknowledged to be Markan. Out of 9,280 words, on my computation, 5,334 are the actual Markan words. About 57% is verbatim copied from Mark. This is the Gospel of Matthew, so this couldn't have been eyewitness testimony. Next slide. Parallels, we have 93% of Mark is paralleled in Matthew, according to Mark Goodacre. 88% of Mark is paralleled in Luke, according to Mark Goodacre. 53% of Luke's words are found in Mark. This is according to B.H. Streeter, or Bernard Streeter, in his book, The Four Gospels, page 202. This is an expert on the Gospels and on the Ferrer hypothesis. You see that chart right there. It shows how much of Mark was copied by both Matthew and Luke. And that is an indication to us that this is not eyewitness testimony. These were later editions that were copying from Mark simply and just issuing their own gospels. Next slide. Gentile audience, Jesus, again, these gospels were written for a Gentile audience. You could see that in John chapter 1, verse 38. Jesus turned around and saw them following him and said to them, "What do you want?" So they said to him, "Rabbi," which is translated as teacher. They wouldn't translate these phraseologies to their audience unless this is a Gentile audience unfamiliar with Jewish sayings or Hebraic sayings. Matthew 22:23, the same day the Sadducees, who say that there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him. So he wouldn't have to explain who the Sadducees are had he been writing to a Jewish audience. And they will name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Again, Matthew 1 and 23. So he's writing to a Gentile church because he's explaining what Emmanuel means to his audience. Now the Passover, the Feast of the Jews, was near, John 6 and 4. Again, he's explaining what the Passover is to his audience because they're not a Jewish audience. Next slide. Geography mistakes. We see that clearly that Mark contains some geography mistakes. When Jesus was in the vicinity of Tyre, he left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon down to the area, to the Sea of Galilee, to the region of the Decapolis. That's in Jordan. So he went all the way north to go south, which makes no sense geographically, which indicates that Mark was not native to the area. Again, when they went to the other region of the lake, this is according to Mark 5, Matthew 8, and Luke 8, to cure a man in the region of Gerasa or the Gerasenes. You see that he casted a bunch of demons into a herd of pigs, which was feeding, and the demonic spirits begged him, "Let us enter these pigs." So they went down a hill, went down an embankment, and fell into water and drowned into the lake. There's no lake next to Gerasa. It's 40 miles away from the Sea of Galilee or the Lake of Tiberias. So therefore, this just shows another geography mistake. Next slide. Anachronisms. Again, in the Gospel of Matthew, we have Pontius Pilate washing his hands. This is a Jewish practice that's ascribed to Pontius Pilate erroneously, and it comes from Psalms 26:6. It's not attested in any Roman literature. I wash my hands in innocence and go about your altar, O Lord. Pontius Pilate, he washed his hands to show his innocence, which is not something that Pontius Pilate would do historically. Again, in the Gospel of Matthew, it says that there were words that were written by the prophet Jeremiah. They took 30 coins of silver, the price of one whose head had been set by the people of Israel, but he falsely attributes it to Jeremiah when it comes from Zechariah 11:12. So this is a person that didn't know the Bible very well, the Hebrew Old Testament very well, which indicates he's a Gentile writer. Mark makes a similar error when he attributes that Abiathar was a high priest when David went in and ate the shewbread, when Ahimelech was the real high priest, according to the book of Samuel. Laws on divorce, again, this is another anachronism in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10, verses 12. If a woman divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. Well, women didn't divorce in Judea. They didn't have that law yet. This is a Gentile law. They're speaking to a Gentile audience. Only Gentile women could divorce in that time. Jewish women couldn't divorce, according to the Jewish law. During the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness, according to Luke 3:2. We don't know of a high priesthood with two high priests ever. There's nothing in Josephus, nothing in Philo speaking about it, nothing in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's no early attestation, no outside attestation of it, other than the Gospel of Luke, which shows us that a Gentile was writing the Gospel of Luke. Next slide. Gentile self-identification. In the Gospel of Matthew, he says that they took the money that they were instructed to, and they did with it, and they bought a field. And this story is told among the Jews to this day, according to Matthew 28, which shows that he's speaking about the Jews in third person. John does the same. He says that Jews had already agreed no one should confess him to be the Christ unless he would be put out of the synagogue. John 15:25. This is to fulfill what is written in their law. They hated me without reason. So he's speaking about the law in third person. We can end it here, William. I appreciate it.
All righty. Thank you guys for your opening statements. Now we are going to go into our rebuttals. So Chris, you have, let's see here, you have 5 minutes, and you are going to, give me 1 second. You're going to respond to everything that Shadi just presented in his opening statement. Okay.
Well,
it is going to be brief. It is only 5 minutes. You got to cover materials.
Yeah.
5 minutes. Okay.
No, yeah, it's fine.
You ready?
Yep, I got this.
All right, here we go.
Okay, everybody out there, you notice something about Shadi's argument. He attacked background, not evidence, okay? My opponent gave you a string of assertions, not even proved, okay? Unlettered Galileans, only 1% literacy. They didn't speak Greek, written for Gentiles. Mark has geography mistakes. Matthew copied Mark. Notice something? None of that disproves authorship. And this is what I said was going to happen. There is no alternative except for what the historical method, what it does is it takes all the evidence we have and it basically, it will basically tell us the answer based on the evidence that we have. Shadi did a lot of speculation about background, not evidence against attribution. So that's the point for me. In the historical method, we don't argue from possibility. We argue from evidence and explanatory power. Let's start with the unlettered doesn't mean illiterate, okay? Now, a lot of people do this. They make a mistake on translation. In Acts, Peter and John are called agrammatoi. That means not formally rabbinically trained, not illiterate fishermen who couldn't function in society, okay? Galilee was multilingual, trade routes, Roman administration, Greek commerce. The question is not, could a Galilean speak Greek? The question is it plausible someone in that environment could? Yes, very plausible. And even if they use scribes, it does not change authorship. I never said that they wrote everything word by word, hand by hand. the scribes, definitely wrote a lot of this too. So, in ancient law and historiography, a document dictated through a scribe still belongs to the source. Roman court depositions worked exactly like this. Authorship equals source authority, not handwritten. Okay. Literacy statistics are irrelevant. 1% literacy, even if that number were accurate, and that's debated. It applies to the entire empire, including peasants, slaves, children. The apostles were leaders of a fast growing movement, traveling teachers, engaging in synagogues. They were not random farm laborers. And more importantly, low literacy in a culture does not disprove authorship in specific cases. That's a non sequitur. So let's throw that one out. Matthew copied Mark. This is one of my favorite ones. Now, let's assume for a second Mark in priority for argument's sake. Even if Matthew used Mark, so what? Ancient historians use sources. Using a source does not mean you're not an eyewitness. If Matthew was present, he could incorporate Mark's structure and supplement it with his own material. Luke explicitly says he used earlier sources. Source usage strengthens historicity. It does not negate authorship. So actually, what they don't realize, the people that use that, is that it's actually a point for me. That's called external attribution. And then the more attribution of something, the more likely it is. So thank you for that one, Shadi. Written for Gentiles, okay? Audience does not equal the authorship. Now, Paul wrote to Gentiles. He was still Paul. Explaining Jewish customs does not mean the author wasn't Jewish. It means he knew his audience. That's literally literary adaptation, not fraud. Geography mistakes. Even if Mark made a geographic error, which is, again, debated, okay? Usually when we dig on these things, we see that it's usually the reader that is mistaken, not the New Testament. But that would show possible scribal confusion, transmission complexity, human limitation. It does not prove anonymous forgery, false attribution, fraudulent authorship. Again, this is not evidence against the authors. One alleged error does not collapse attribution supported by early unanimous testimony. That's not how the historical method works. And again, I'm just going to say he never touched my core case, okay? He didn't address early external attestation, unanimous manuscript titles, no competing attributions, no early dispute in the 2nd century, apostolic proximity, meaning they likely and for sure could have wrote it, and patristic testimony. And we've seen the fathers, whatever you believe about them, they did not let fraudulent works in, and they debated them tremendously. And it just goes to show you there was no debate on these. So that's big right there for history. He attacked plausibility narratives. He did not rebut the historical data, not even close. And in legal reasoning, if you cannot overturn the positive evidence, you do not win by suggesting alternative hypotheticals. Okay, this is not a case of hypothetical. This is a case of the evidence and what it says. That's how the historical method works. Eyewitness testimony and law. Now, here's something a lot of people don't know. 90% of this or 85% of that, Matthew had 85% of Mark. In court, eyewitness testimony is admissible even if the witness isn't formally educated, the testimony is later written down, the witness uses an assistant, minor discrepancies exist. What matters is proximity to events, chain of transmission, lack of contradictory attribution, consistency with historical context. The gospel satisfies those criteria far better than most Greco-Roman works we accept without controversy. And if they're all eyewitnesses, they're going to have 90, 80% of what the other wrote. I mean, if they had 100%, then I would say it's a forgery, right? So, okay, one more quick thing. He wants you to believe illiteracy makes authorship impossible. Source use means no eyewitness. Gentile audience means Gentile author. Minor issues equal fraud. This is not the historical method. That is modern skepticism laid onto ancient practice. My case stands. The blessed explanation of the evidence is that the gospel is derived from the traditional authors or from the immediate authoritative circle. Until he overturns the positive evidence, speculation does not defeat attribution. Thank you. Thank you for letting me go over time.
Yeah, that's fine. Shady, if you go over time, go ahead. That's fine. He went over time around 30 seconds, so we can grant you that. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Let's go to my slides. If you could share my slide on Papias of Hierapolis real quick.
Yeah, hold on. I gotta reopen that, man. Give me 1 second.
No, sure.
Okay. Which page do you want exactly?
Oh, the one on Papias, if you can go to it.
I'm the one with Papias. Okay. All right. Here's your rebuttal. Let me give me 1 second here. Somehow it's not working. All right. Whenever you're ready.
Let me see the screen. I don't see it yet. Let me see here. There we go. I'm ready.
All right, go
So,
ahead.
what did Papias actually say in Eusebius Church History, Book 3? He told us that Mark became the interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately, though not in order. So, not in order what he remembered of the things that were taught by Christ. And then what else does he tell us? He tells us concerning Matthew, he writes as follows, so that Matthew wrote the oracles. So he wrote the sayings of Jesus in the Hebrew tongue, and everyone interpreted them as they were able to. So clearly, Papias did not know who wrote the Gospels, because the Gospel of Mark that we have is in order. It's in chronology. It's written in order from beginning all the way to the end. Takes you all the way to the crucifixion. He didn't know that the Gospel of Matthew was actually written in Greek, because it copies Mark a lot of times verbatim. 50% of Matthew is, or 50% of Mark is in Matthew verbatim. This is Greek copying. He's copying syntax, grammar, Greek structure. This tells us that Papias was writing too late. He had no idea. He was making these mistakes. He was prone to making these mistakes. Even Eusebius says, well, he was a man who was of no discernment in his church histories. And Philip of Sides said he is not a dependable person because he made mistakes when it comes to the millennial kingdom. He talked about grapes the size of a room, and therefore Irenaeus copies Papias, and therefore Irenaeus fell into the same mistakes. So the church tradition came too late, and it was very, very unreliable. And that's why we have these mistakes. Now, my opponent today told you guys that I'm not using the historic method. I don't think Chris understands the historic method very well, because he did not provide any positive proof to you guys at all. He just simply read his presentation without providing any positive proof. I'm actually giving you guys proof, and I'm showing you guys skepticism, and I'm showing you I'm casting doubt on his argument. I'm actually telling you guys the disciples couldn't read or write. He talked about the disciples, they were not trained rabbinically. Rabbinical Judaism did not exist in that time, so they couldn't have been anyway. It comes in the 2nd century. He talked about the word attribution. Now, when you look at authorial attribution, the definition of authorial attribution, which Chris kept using, is a process of identifying a true creator of a document, text, or artwork by analyzing the linguistic and stylistic features. That means that the writer is unknown. Internal evidence does not show us an author. No author is named in the document. The geographic mistakes clearly indicate to us that this person is not familiar with the geography of the area. He's not from the area. I showed the Gentile self-identification, that these authors were clearly identifying themselves to us as Gentiles and their audience as a Gentile audience by explaining Hebrew beliefs, customs, and they were making anachronistic mistakes that are not typical of Jews who lived in that area. Um, Other issues that he makes, uh, or other errors that he makes, he says that Matthew copies Mark. This is typical. This is normal. No, it's not normal. Matthew is supposed to be an eyewitness, and he's copying a non-eyewitness who could have forgotten so much material, because he wrote his gospel allegedly after Peter had died, and therefore he's copying from a non-eyewitness. And these guys are attributed authors. He did not provide any single shred of evidence. He did not use a historic method to even show us today that these authors are who they claim to be. In fact, these gospels, they circulated anonymously. P1, for example, is one manuscript where the gospel did not have a title. And then later, when we look at the Codex Sinaiticus, these later gospels say Catamarcon, Catamattheon, Catalucan. So we have a secondary phase where it's not even the entire gospel title in the Codex Vaticanus and the Codex Sinaiticus. When we get to the third stage, that's when we have the entire gospel titles in later manuscripts where it says Evangelion, or the gospel according to Matthew, Evangelion, Catamarcon, Evangelion, kata Yudan. So we have three phases where initially the first phase was without a title. The second phase is just according to Matthew. The third phase becomes the gospel according to Matthew. He did not bring any evidence to show that the early church fathers believed that these gospels had a title. According to an Anglican author, B.H. Streeter, he said the Didache is a Syrian document dated not later than 100. Its author knew Matthew, but only referred to anonymously as the gospel. E.P. Sanders, another Christian writer, in the historical figure of Jesus, page 64, he says the gospels as we know them were quoted in the first and second century, but were always anonymous. When we look at the letter of Aristides, Justin Martyr's works, the Didache, they all refer to the Gospels anonymously. This comes before Irenaeus. This comes before any of the other authors. So Irenaeus is just copying from Papias, and Papias is just making these errors. So it's just a tradition that's unverifiable. It's a tradition that's easily falsified because we see, as we see on our screen here, Papias did not know much about Mark and gives us incorrect information, and he gives us incorrect, unreliable information about Matthew. Therefore, this church tradition is a belief, but there's no reason to objectively say it is true.
All right, thank you for that, Chevy. Perfect. All righty, guys. So here's the fun part, right? You guys
All
ready?
right. Yeah, give me a second.
Here is the cross-examination. Okay, so to be clear, cross-examination, as we all know, and you know now, Chris, one side is going to ask the question. The other side is going to keep it simple. Just answer the question. You're not going to ask the other side a question unless you're trying to give an example. Okay?
Right.
So you each get 15 minutes. So this is going to be the 30-minute segment.
Okay.
Whenever you guys are ready, Chris, again, you're the affirmative. You got to go first.
Sure.
Let me know. I'll start the timer on your first word.
All right. Are you ready? Let's go. All right. So, Dottie, would you agree that many ancient works do not name their author inside the narrative?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that some of the ancient works don't name their author in the narrative at all.
Okay. So internal self-identification is not required for ancient authorship attribution?
No, it's not required for ancient authorship attribution at all.
Thank you. Okay. Now, when you say anonymous, do you mean the author didn't sign the body text or the early Christian community did not know who wrote it? Because those are two very different claims.
I'm saying it's both. I'm saying the early Christian community did not know. Therefore, they quoted it without a gospel title, and also that it doesn't have an author named in the text.
Okay. All right. So, all right, that's interesting. So both then is what you're saying.
Correct.
But you mentioned that there are other ancient documents that also don't self-identify. And so this internal self-identification doesn't mean that it's not attributed to those authors.
No, it doesn't mean that it's not attributed. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Now, can you name a single manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew attributed to anyone other than Matthew?
No, what I named was, I think there's the Bodmer papyri, if I'm not mistaken, and then there's another one. I forgot the name of it. I think it's in the Sinaiticus, according to Gather J. Cole, as well as, if I'm not mistaken, there's another papyri that doesn't have a gospel title for the Gospel of Matthew.
No, that's not what I asked. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, what I was asking is there a single manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew attributed to anyone other than Matthew? Not that they didn't have the author.
No, that's how attribution works.
Okay.
No, there's not. Yeah.
Can you name a manuscript of the Gospel of Mark attributed to Peter, Thomas, to anybody else other than Mark?
Yeah, so according to Justin Martyr in his dialogue with Trypho, I think, in First Apology, he does misquote the Gospel of Mark and he attributes it to Peter instead of Mark because he didn't have any gospel titles at the time.
Now, you do know that the Gospel of Mark is attributed to actual Peter. Mark was his scribe. That's what the Church Fathers' earliest attributions tell us.
No, what they say is it's actually written by Mark, not by Peter. That, after Peter had died, Mark wrote it.
Correct. But they also said that it was Peter's events. It was Peter's basically gospel that the scribe Mark had got everything from Peter, basically. You're aware of
Yeah,
that. That was, yeah,
allegedly they tell us that after
right.
Peter had
Yeah.
died, that we attribute that Mark was faithful to what Peter had said. But this is tradition. There's no reason to
Yeah.
believe it. It's erroneous tradition.
Sure. But I mean, wouldn't you think that we would have named it the Gospel of Peter or somebody stronger than Mark? I mean, why would we name it Mark if we were forging the gospel?
Yeah, the reason why it was named the Gospel of Mark is because there was already a Gospel of Peter in circulation that is falsely attributed to Peter, which the church considered to be heretical. So that's the reason why, Mark was available. So let's just show Mark and make the connection to Peter, which makes it just as strong as the other Gospel of Peter, which it's competing with at the time.
Well, wasn't the Gospel of Peter you're talking about? Wasn't that written later in the second or third century?
Well, remember these documents, when those titles start to come in, it's later second century, around the time Irenaeus was writing, which is in the 180s,
Mm-hmm.
where the Gospel of Peter was already circulating at that time.
Mm-hmm. Because historians, wouldn't you agree? The historians say that all of these Gospels were written sometime in the first century. You agree with the historians that say that?
I personally don't agree with historians when they say it, but
Okay.
that's the mainstream position, so it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue it in this
Okay.
debate.
Yeah.
I'll
Sure.
accept the mainstream position.
Okay. Because so the same question for the Gospel of Luke or the Gospel of John. Is there any competing attributions that you can tell me about that would lend credence to your case here? They were
There's a
anonymous.
competing attribution to Luke because Marcion, remember, was fighting over the authorship of Luke with the church. So Marcion claimed that the church stole his gospel, which is the gospel of the Lord,
Good
and
point.
wrote
Yeah.
or they added to it. So there was
Yeah.
some competing
Marcion's Gospel.
attribution there. But the
Yeah.
two gospels, no, there's not for Matthew or John.
Now, what did we do to Marcion's Gospel of Luke? Did we throw it out, or did we put it in the canon, or did we accept it?
So the gospel that was in contention between Marcion and the church,
Mm-hmm.
which is the Gospel of Luke, we do have it in
Mm-hmm.
the canon. We
Mm-hmm.
have the expanded version of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Well, the Gospel of Marcion was thrown out, but and now if these were anonymous for decades and names were added later, why do we not see attribution diversity? I mean, I'm curious why if they're anonymous, why wouldn't we have debated like everything else in the church? We wouldn't have debated these. Well, what's your answer for that, historically
Well,
speaking?
you saw some attribution diversity early on, but um, the way it worked with church attribution is, like later on, that's when we see these gospel titles in the later second century, which is around the time Irenaeus was writing, and so the church just accepted it as it was, and they wrote the gospel according to Luke, or the gospel according to Mark, or the gospel
Mm-hmm.
according to John. But if these were the real authors, you wouldn't name the gospel that way, which shows this is an attribution and this is just at best a guess.
Mm-hmm. Now, geographic spread normally produces variation. Why not here? Do you think? Why did this not produce variation here?
Because when it was circulating anonymously, and the tradition wasn't really contested very well
Okay.
early on,
Okay. Fair
and
enough.
it was just accepted the way it was.
Okay. Now, when exactly were the names added then? If you're saying they're anonymous early on, what's your evidence for that? When exactly were the names added? Give me a date.
I would say somewhere in the late second century, either at the time of Irenaeus or right before Irenaeus. When Irenaeus was writing, he most likely added the titles, or somebody before him, a predecessor, added it.
And then what's your evidence for that?
My evidence is it doesn't show up in the record before Irenaeus that we know of.
Okay. So the
When
argument from silent.
Irenaeus was writing his fourfold gospel, he didn't have any gospel titles. Justin Martyr doesn't have gospel titles. When we look at Aristides, he didn't know of a gospel title. When we look at the Didache, when we look at Ignatius, they don't know of any gospel titles. Those are the earliest writers.
Now, so you can't give me a date to when these names were added. Second century, mid second century, late. Be
Well,
specific.
I gave you a guess. I gave you
Yeah.
an
Best
educated
guess.
guess, which is
The
late
evidence.
second century.
Okay. Now you'd have to be throwing out early attestation, though, right? You'd have to be throwing out, Irenaeus, Papias, and the fact that there was no early, contributing attribution. So you're going to throw that out?
Yeah, because Irenaeus is late. He's writing in the 180s, so that's about
Right.
100 years later. A lot can happen in 100 years, and people can mistakenly have traditional beliefs that they attribute something to someone else. And Papias was just clearly, plainly wrong. I mean, we saw that on the screen that he thought the Gospel of Mark was written in order and Matthew was written in Hebrew, and it's just plainly wrong. He just didn't know any better.
That's for another debate. But now, are you aware that Alexander the Great, you believe that he existed, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Right. Do you know that we don't have any evidence of him for 300 years from the time he was born to this first writings that we have today? 300 years passed by. But you believe him, but you don't believe the Gospels, or you think it's late, 150 years. Why is that?
What do you mean we don't have evidence of him? We have coins in Alexander's name and cities.
Yeah, but when you look at external citation, you don't have anything for 300 years. That's a long time, right? According to you, that's double the time that we have here.
No, we have documents from his own lifetime.
300 years
That's
after. No, not from his own lifetime. We don't. That's not true. We do not have anything from his lifetime. The
we
earliest, and the audience can look this up. The earliest we have Alexander the Great, because they didn't survive, is 300 years after his reign. So,
are you sure? Because we have text
yeah,
documents.
positive. Yeah, anybody can look that up. Now, what historical evidence documents the moment the church assigned these names? So, what's your historical evidence that documents the moment the church assigned these names? Is there a council record?
Is my evidence is it doesn't appear any time before Irenaeus. We see it in Papias at first. Papias just didn't know, and Irenaeus, like Philip of Sides said, and just like Eusebius said, Irenaeus was just known to copy Papias's mistakes, and they just said Papias was unreliable. So that's my evidence: is he's copying from an unreliable early author, a tradition that's really mistaken.
But you don't have a council record, a letter, a dispute, anything, like nothing at all that we can concretely say this is what happened. Just an argument from silence is what you're using.
That's not an argument from silence. That's actually positive evidence. I put Papias on the screen as quoted by Eusebius, and I showed the errors. And we know that Irenaeus was copying from Papias when he copied the tradition. That's not silence. That's later positive evidence.
Yeah, but didn't you say the reason that the Gospels, I asked you when they attributed names, and you had said that because, you can give it again, because what did you say again? The Papias didn't say anything, or what was your evidence again for that? Still don't even understand what you were saying.
Papias was just clearly mistaken. He made a mistake. He had no idea. He was just guesstimating at best, and Irenaeus copied the mistake. And therefore, this is just a late false tradition. And I mean, you could believe in it if you want to, but there's no objective truth to it. And why should academic professors and academics, accept it when there's no meat and potatoes to it?
Okay. Now, are you familiar with Papias of Hierapolis, since you've been talking about him?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Do you deny he attributes Matthew and Mark?
No, I don't deny that he attributes those gospels.
Are you familiar with Irenaeus?
I'm familiar with Irenaeus.
Do you deny he explicitly names all four authors?
No, I don't. I think Irenaeus is the first to, positively insist on the attributions.
Okay. Now, can you produce a single early Christian source saying we do not know who wrote this gospel? Just one.
I'm sorry?
Can you produce a single early Christian source saying we do not know who wrote this gospel?
No, because the tradition was accepted from 2nd century. It's an uncontested tradition. That doesn't mean it's a true tradition.
Early attribution.
Guys, just a warning. Here, sorry to interrupt. We got 3 minutes left.
Okay, thanks. Can you show evidence of 2nd century debate over gospel authorship? Because they debated over everything that was even a little bit fishy. Any evidence here of a 2nd century debate over gospel authorship? I mean, they debated Christology, canon theology. Why no authorship controversy, Shadi?
Why debate something if it's not fruitful? There's no, use to it. And I mean, the church was fighting heretics at that point. So why divide itself? They needed They needed the attribution to try to refute the heretics. Look, we got these gospels that carry weight. They're better than your gospels.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's no reason to debate them. If these were legendary community products, why do they preserve Peter's denial, disciples fleeing, women discovering the tomb? Legends usually glorify heroes. Why preserve embarrassment?
Yeah, so that just shows us that Peter didn't write that gospel, because that's not just embarrassment, right? Peter's denial was made to make Peter look like an apostate and make him look as bad as possible. And this is just proof to us, at the end of that Gospel of Mark, Peter doesn't get rehabilitated. And it's very, very unlikely that Peter would narrate these embarrassing claims about himself if he was the narrator of this gospel. He would have
Right.
said that, he had the keys to the church, and anything he bound or loosed would have been bound in heaven, which is only found in Matthew. That's not found in the Gospel of Mark. So therefore, it's unlikely that Peter was behind the authorship of Mark.
So the way the criterion of embarrassment works is it's unlikely they would put it in there unless it was honest and true. And would you agree historians accept authorship of many Greco-Roman works based on early attribution, manuscript consistency, and lack of competing tradition? Yes or no?
That makes it anonymous authorship, Chris. That doesn't make it true that that's who the author is. That's how an attributed author works. We don't know who wrote it. It's just basically a guesstimate. We think that's who the writer is.
Okay. I have to
That's
stop you
just
there. Now, you misquoted something about what attribution means. This is from the Merriam-Webster. Attribution means the act of attributing something, the ascribing work to a particular author. That doesn't mean anonymous. I don't know where you got that. So let's make sure that we're using attribution the right way. That's from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So I'll ask again, would you agree historians accept authorship of many Greco-Roman works based on early attribution, manuscript consistency, and lack of competing tradition? Yes or no?
Yeah, I told you, yes, it's attributed.
Okay.
It's an anonymous work.
Okay. Now, if those criteria are sufficient for other ancient works, why are they insufficient here? Is the standard you're using consistent?
Those
Or are you
other ancient works are attributed and therefore anonymous as well. Like the writers of Homer's Iliad, we don't know who they are. We really don't. We're just taking a stab at it in the dark, just like with the Gospels.
No, Homer's attributed to that, and there's many other without it. Are you
Okay.
applying a higher skepticism selectively here?
Last
No,
question.
I'm applying it evenly. It's objective.
Okay, now,
Chris, that's
okay.
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 All right, Shadi, whenever you're ready, on your first word, I'm going to start the timer.
Okay, I appreciate it. Go ahead. Would you say that Peter dictated the entire contents of the Gospel of Mark, Chris?
Not sure. I know attribution could be 80%, 90%. Yeah, but I know that you have a lot of honesty in the Gospels simply because the church didn't debate it. We have a strong apostolic tradition there. And Mark, being a close companion of Peter, he wouldn't want to dishonor his death by lying. I mean, we haven't seen anything with dishonesty from these guys. That they're all martyrs, anyways.
Would you say that Peter knew Latin and spoke Latin?
I would say that Mark did.
Mark did, and he spoke Latin, right?
I would say so, yeah.
So the Latinisms in the Gospel of Mark, would you attribute those to Peter or to Mark?
You know what? I don't have the evidence really to make a case either way. I'm not sure.
So let's say Peter was narrating the story of the Passion of Jesus, right? And say he said
Sure.
that, they went to the palace, which is called the Praetorium, right?
Uh-huh.
So he's literally here translating to his audience what that means, right? Would you say that was said by Peter or said by Mark?
Mark could have possibly, told some of the things that were in Roman. He could have translated some of those Roman things, if that's what you mean. Sure, yeah. The scribe there could have given a more Roman feel to it. Since Mark probably being the scribe, he probably
you're showing us why Peter is not the dictator of this gospel, because
no,
you know how much of it goes to Peter and how much of it is Mark's words, and those are allegedly the authors. So this is like how traditional attribution work. We don't even know how much of this can't go back to Peter. We were just taking a stab at it. Okay.
No. You hold on. You pick one little thing, and then you're trying to attribute that to the whole gospel. It doesn't. Historicity doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that, Shadi.
But he's translating. You clearly would tell me that he's translating Greek phraseology to Latin, right?
Yeah,
Would you
but these
agree
are
with
all.
that?
I mean, these are all hypotheticals. You know, what we're doing is we're
They're not
hypothetical.
hypothetical.
There's no real evidence either way. I'm just giving you my thoughts on this.
No, there is
I'm no expert in
evidence
it.
because the Gospel of Mark tells you they went to the palace, which is in Greek called auli,
Mhm.
which in Latin is translated to praetorium. This is not a hypothetical. He's literally translating the Greek to his audience. This is
Yeah,
an
but
audience that's unfamiliar with Greek, and he's making it clear to them what these terms mean.
sure. But you had mentioned that 90% of it is in Matthew, so the events are still going to be Mark, which is what matter, or Peter, which is what matters. So yeah, Mark
Yeah,
might,
so
illuminate us on a Latin term. That's fine. That's not gonna that's not gonna ruin authorship for Peter. And besides, it is called the Gospel of Mark after all. You know.
it casts doubt on the Petrine authorship. It just shows us that's traditional attribution that doesn't necessarily hold up. Will you
Well,
say that Peter was narrating
well,
the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane?
well, maybe that's why it's called the Gospel of Mark, not the Gospel of Peter. I mean, so I think you're now proving that we attribute it to the right person, the wrong person. So I think that works in the favor of the Gospel of Mark against it.
But that just weakens that link. That just shows us that we don't know. We're just making up these names. So would you say that
But
Peter was
so,
narrating the prayer? Would you say yes or no? Would you say that Peter was narrating the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane?
I would say, yeah, sure, I would say that.
So he dictated that prayer, and that's how Mark got it.
I would say so, yeah. I mean, again, I'm not an expert,
So
but I would say so, yeah.
how could he do it if he was asleep?
Well, again, historicity doesn't necessarily mean you had to be an eyewitness of 100% of the events. He could have got something from Matthew, and still that's external attribution. As I said in one of my rebuttals, it doesn't take away from the fact that he was an eyewitness. So, he saw something, Matthew saw something, they could exchange notes. That's completely fine. They're both apostles. It doesn't take away from
But
anything.
you know what the definition is of an eyewitness, right?
Well,
Someone who
again,
has to actually witness and see the events or
that's
hear them.
actually not that's actually not exactly true. Because Luke, we know, wasn't a direct eyewitness, but he interviewed eyewitnesses and it almost made his case stronger. It's actually
Yeah,
not
so
true.
he's not an eyewitness. So he was not there. That's what I'm trying to tell you. He's not an eyewitness. This is exactly how historicity works, and you're misusing historic applications and the historic method. For the historic method to work, according to von Ranke, who's the father of modern history, you have to have an eyewitness at the site. He has to see it or hear it and report it, and he has to be reliable. And Peter narrated to us this entire, well, allegedly, according to you, he narrated this entire prayer at the Garden of Gethsemane, and he wasn't there to see it or hear it.
Okay, just to clear up the record, we don't need 100% eyewitness to have a credible historical document there. Again, he could have used, because we're within eyewitness territory here. You understand? We're talking about the apostles. So you're counting dust on the apostles. It's a tough case to sell, man. The apostles, we know, were shoulder to shoulder with Jesus. So whether he was asleep or not, I'm sure 12 other people or whatever, they could have gotten the story straight, right? And
Where did
it's
they
more
get it from?
it's more than likely true than not if we know it's an apostle. So no, that's not a very good
But
case to
Chris,
me.
let me say this, right? You sleep at night, right? Let's say you slept at night, and I don't know. Let's say the Koreans invaded Los Angeles. Would you be an eyewitness to it if you're in your bed and sleeping at the time?
So just to correct you, my friend, no ancient historiography does not require 100% eyewitness authorship. Okay, just reliable access to eyewitness testimony. So you're arguing
Yeah,
something that doesn't work with the historical method.
but they didn't have access to an eyewitness testimony. That's what I'm telling you. Peter was asleep. Um, Jesus took his disciples, James, Peter, and John. They went to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus said, "Stay here. Let me go and pray." And he went to go pray. They
Mm-hmm.
fell asleep. The prayer is recorded in detail, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he comes back
Sure.
and he wakes them up and he says, "Are you still asleep?" They say,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we slept. The flesh is weak. He wakes him
Mhm.
up, says, stand here and guard while I go pray again. He prays again, does his own thing, comes back. They're dead asleep. They're deep asleep. So this prayer is recorded in detail, even though these disciples slept three
Sure.
times, not once,
Sure.
not twice. They were in
Yeah.
deep sleep. These guys couldn't have seen it, couldn't have reported it, couldn't have written about it. And you're telling me that this is eyewitness testimony? No, Mark made this up. Clearly, this is not Peter's testimony.
Okay. Now, can I answer? It's supposed to be a question, not a monologue. But so I'll answer your question if that was one. Ancient historiography, again, does not require 100% eyewitness authorship, Shadi. It does not. As long as you have reliable access to eyewitness testimony, which we agree that the apostles were. Do you? I mean, I can't ask,
Okay.
but yeah,
But this
the apostles are
makes
as good as it
that Garden
gets.
of Gethsemane this
So
makes
you're
that
special
Garden of
pleading.
Gethsemane scene a legendary account. What I'm telling you is we don't
Special
have any
pleading.
eyewitnesses,
No,
any
that's
eyewitness. This is not special pleading. This is just exactly what it is. I'm literally showing you inside the gospel.
no, that's
Um,
special pleading because
would
you
you
wouldn't
would
attribute
you
this to any other historical work. You know,
would you say that?
they have reliable access to eyewitness testimony, and they just do.
Okay. So would you say that Mark was writing the gospel? This is a yes or no question. Would you
Mhm.
say Mark wrote his gospel because he heard Peter sermonizing and preaching, and therefore he tried to remember his sermonization and preaching, and then he wrote it down that way?
No, this wasn't from memory. I'm sure this was from notes. He traveled with Peter, so sure
Okay,
he'd taken notes. But then again, you know, it could have been a combination too. I just know
did his
that.
notes.
Look, if I'm friends with Peter, if I have Peter sitting right here, and you're going to tell me that that's not good eyewitness, reliable access to eyewitness testimony, I'm going to tell you you're wrong, man. Who wouldn't want to hang out with Peter and talk about Jesus? And you're going to tell me that that's not good eyewitness testimony? I mean, come on, man. What are we doing here?
How do you explain the anachronisms that these authors were not familiar with Jewish customs?
I would disagree that they weren't. Matthew, for example, is a very Semitic structure, you know, and he had prophecies in there. You guys like cherry pick the one or two that you don't understand, but like I've
Okay,
counted
okay, okay.
26.
I'll give you a case. I'll give you a direct case, right?
Yeah,
Mark says that women could divorce their husband, right? This is clearly an anachronism. Do you have any type of proof where women in Judea could divorce their husbands, or in Galilee, Jewish women? You have any type of
sure.
proof for that?
Okay, I do. So in the Gospels that we're talking about, Jesus says, it has been written that Moses said you can offer your wife a certificate of divorce. So under Mosaic law, based on what Jesus said, you could divorce your wife. Yeah.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you, do you have any type of proof outside of the New Testament that Jewish women could divorce their husband?
I mean, I have internal evidence. You know, Jesus himself said
Right.
that you
So,
could. So, and that's Mosaic law. I mean, you know, that's as good. That's as good as it gets.
but that's an anachronism because according to the Jewish law, the women couldn't obtain a divorce. The man had to file for the divorce. He couldn't obtain it. Could you explain other anachronisms? The Gospel of John talks about the expulsion of the church from the synagogue.
I
What's
mean,
your explanation for it?
well, you know, a lot of these anachronisms, as you say, are debatable. They might even take another debate for us to have, like the reliability of the Gospels. But yeah, I mean, I dispute everything you're saying about it.
Have you heard of something, a document called the Berkat Hamim? Okay, the Berkat Hamim is a Jewish document that talks about the expulsion of Christians or would-be Christians from the synagogue, and that comes in the second century. So this shows us that the writer of John was influenced by something that happened in the second century. That's what I'm telling you. These gospels, they record anachronisms that come much later, and this is a clear indication that these authors are not what is the traditional attributed name to them.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. What was your point about that? What is it called? The Berkat Hamadi?
Yeah,
What was your
the
case there?
Birkat
Go ahead.
Hadim, my case is that John talks about the expulsion of Christians from the synagogue,
Hmm.
and that didn't happen until the second century. So
Yeah.
how do you explain that?
Well, it likely developed after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD when rabbinic Judaism was consolidating authority at Armenia. So yeah, that's a later development anyways. It's not going to tell us
Shadi,
anything about.
We got 3 minutes left. Just letting you guys know.
Okay.
So
So
yeah, so I don't think really has anything to do with the gospel authorship today. I think
do you believe that? Do you believe that Jesus sinned?
no, Jesus did not sin.
Is it a sin to break the Sabbath?
No, it's not. Jesus
It's not a
explained.
sin.
No, no, it's not a sin. It's not a sin to break the
It's
Sabbath.
not
No,
to
no, no,
violate
no,
the
no.
Sabbath.
Yeah, no, not for what he did, not for to heal a person to on the Sabbath.
No, that's not what I'm talking about.
That's not a sin.
I'm talking about violating the Sabbath. Is it a sin to violate the Sabbath?
Well, when you say violate the Sabbath, I mean, I'm just trying to
To
clear. I'm
break
not
it.
trying to ask questions, but I'm trying to clarify what you mean exactly. Violate the Sabbath.
We don't have a specific, I'm just asking a general question. Would it be a sin to break the Sabbath in Jewish
It
law?
it depends. Depends.
Well, yes or no. Let's say it's a case, somebody breaks the Sabbath. We have somebody narrating about it. They said this person broke the Sabbath. So are we saying this person possibly violated the law?
Well, so basically, if, for example, I have somebody has a heart attack on the Sabbath and I have to break it to save that person, I think that I'm within my rights. I don't think that's a sin.
Well, what about working on the Sabbath? Would you say that's a sin?
Um, you know, for me, because I believe in Sabbath too, it really depends on the situation. I
It's a
think.
Jewish law. Well, what would you make of John, the Gospel of John
Mhm.
saying, traditional John? He says that Jesus was breaking the Sabbath. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was also upsetting the elders and their
Mhm.
tradition. He
All
is the
right.
one
Yeah.
that's telling us, making that point, taking that point home. He's the one that's telling us Jesus was breaking the Sabbath.
Yeah. And he certainly was, and he rebuked the people that were trying to rebuke him with, "You guys forgot why these laws exist," and he kind of got into the deeper meaning as Jesus usually did.
Okay, but if he was breaking the Sabbath, would that fly in first century Judea?
Well, no, that's why. I mean, that's part of the reason why they killed him. I mean, they had been fed up with Jesus because he came and
Yeah,
told
but
all the Pharisees.
they would have killed him before he had gone to the cross. He would have died
"Oh,
right there on the spot, or he would have lost all his credibility and he would have had no followers. The easiest explanation is to say that the writer of the Gospel of John, what traditionally we know as John, was a
mhm.
Gentile that came much later, and he attributed these anachronisms to Jesus when they didn't really fit his timeline at all.
It's a presupposition, man. You're presupposing one thing, presupposing another, and it's a house of cards. You know what I
All
mean?
righty,
You,
guys.
you, you can't presuppose.
That's it.
Okay. All right.
Well, thank you guys both. So
Yeah,
before
man, that was
we start
fun.
closing, I have a question for Chris.
Yeah.
Okay, can you quickly steelman Shadi's position?
Yeah. Okay. It was tough because, I appreciate, first of all, I appreciate Shadi coming over. Me and him have been wanting to debate for a long time. So I want to thank him, as a friend and somebody. I hope we can do more of these debates. It's been fun. He's challenged me on a few things, but as far as his argument goes on this, it's just more of the same. Trying to cast doubt by kind of muddying the waters and kind of throwing a bunch of stuff. It's a fallacy. But his still man of his argument is basically the gospel authorship wasn't who they said they were because he used a lot of, I think, the law of on the historical method, the law of the what's it called? Shoot, hold on, give me a second here. There's a here it is right here. Hold on, let me get it for you real quick. I just can't think of the word right now, but he did one. There was one that he kept hitting on, kind of the internal coherence. He didn't have really proximity to events, assist eyewitnesses, transmission chain corroboration, but internal coherence. He really tried to hit that on the head on the historical method. So that they weren't internally coherent because of the Jewish law here must have been a Gentile there and things like that. So that's what I think his
Cool.
argument was.
All
Yeah,
right, thank you. Shadi,
yeah.
can you real quick steelman for us Chris's position?
Yeah, absolutely. Chris's position is that the authorship of the Gospels was uncontested after the attribution. Also, it was early enough to where we can trust these attributions that were done by Irenaeus and Papias even though I've shown today that there's no reason to trust Papias. But that's the steel man of his argument, is that we could place our faith and trust because the Gospels were uncontested as far as titles, and there's no councils about it.
And my question, I got a personal question to you. Like
Mhm.
so in your religion, what is your religion's position on the Christian Gospels?
Good question.
My religious position is that these Gospels most likely don't go back to Jesus himself, that these titles and authors probably were written by anonymous authors. We don't know who they are, but we know that a gospel was given to Jesus. We think some remnants of it might possibly be in these gospels, but they were written so late that they muddied up the picture, and a lot of doctrines and a lot of beliefs came into the frame that shouldn't have been part of the picture, and therefore, it's not a reliable tradition.
Cool, thank you. All right, Chris, your 5 minutes closing.
All right. So hey, thank you to Shadi, man, for coming out here. Thank you for Counterdocs as well, man. It's been great as always. So one thing Shadi said I want to start off with, he kind of insinuated I didn't use evidence. In my opening statement, if you replay this because it was recorded, I used every bit of evidence in the historical method. My second rebuttal was more to rebuke what he said, and he said a lot, so I had to rebut a lot. And guess what? I rebutted everything that he said in his second statement. So the first statement, I presented my evidence, and my evidence is the best, okay? Because look, the church doesn't just accept these things. I mean, our eternal souls on the line, and these early attributions, they mattered. And anytime there was even a question, you would see huge debates and huge fights within the church. A theory that the Gospels were anonymous, that the name that can authorship to create authority. But what you have not heard, not once, as I told you before, is actual historical evidence proving that claim. Just a lot of throwing doubt in there. Doubt doesn't win the day for the opposing, and the reason is doubt doesn't win the day because still, with all the evidence we have, it's still the best formulation of that evidence that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the Gospels because there's no rival. There's just no rival attribution to anybody. I mean, that'd be unheard of in history. Especially to win the day. Let's simplify everything, okay? The core question is not, do the Gospels explicitly say, I, Matthew? Many ancient works don't self-identify inside the text. The real question is, did early Christians know who wrote them? And the historical record says yes. Manuscript reality. Every surviving manuscript that contains the title attributes Matthew to Matthew, Mark to Mark, Luke to Luke, and John to John. There's no competing attribution tradition, none. If these names were assigned later, we would expect variation. And I want you, the audience, to think about that for a second. Go look at other anonymous works. Look at how much variation there is there. We don't see it. Uniformity this early is not what legends look like. It is preserved memory looks like. Early testimony by the early 2nd century, Papias of Hermopolis attributes Matthew and Mark. By the late 2nd century, Irenaeus explicitly names all 4 authors. And here's what matters. There's no recorded controversy over authorship in the early church. Early Christians debated everything. They did not debate who wrote the 4 Gospels. If they were anonymous for decades, that silence makes no sense. The why these names problem, okay? Again, if the church fabricated authorship, they chose poorly. 2 of the 4 authors, Mark and Luke, were not apostles. Forgery exaggerates authority. This looks like preservation, not invention. It's that little bit of twist that truth has. You don't know until you hear it. And once you hear it, you said, okay, that's what truth sounds like. The burden of proof. My opponent is asking you to believe the Gospels circulated anonymously. Names were added later. This happened universally. No competing traditions survived. No controversy was recorded. No manuscript variation appeared. That's an enormous historical claim. Where's the documentation here? Where's the evidence of the moment the names were assigned? Where's the record of debate? It does not exist. Now let's talk about the historical method. Historians accept authorship of any ancient work based on the attribution, consistent manuscript tradition, no competing authorship claims. Any other historical work, it's a done deal, okay? This is going to be a historical fact as it is, okay? And that's just the way it works. The Gospels meet those criteria. So no special pleading is going to be allowed by me in this case. You've got to put the same criteria on the Gospels that you would outside history, because I haven't used theology. I haven't used the church in a theological sense. Like I'm a Christian, the Holy Spirit did this and that. I'm using straight history here. If you reject them here, consistency demands you reject large portions of ancient historiography as well. So the simplest The simplest explanation is usually the best. What requires fewer assumptions? That early Christians preserved the names of the authors connected to apostolic authority? Or that an anonymous tradition was later universally and flawlessly harmonized without leaving a trace? One explanation is simple transmission. The other requires invisible historical events, which we don't accept as logical people, do we? Historians prefer the explanation with fewer speculative layers. My final thought is this, guys. You do not have to believe the Gospels were inspired, but historically speaking, dismissing them as anonymous late legends does not fit the evidence we actually possess. Early testimony, check. Manuscript uniformity, check. No competing traditions, check. Plausible apostolic connections, check. This is not myth making, that is history preserved. And how much time do I have? All right, so let's end this simply. If the Gospels were anonymous legends, show me the confusion. Show me the manuscripts that disagree. Show me the second century debate over who wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You can't. What we actually have is early attribution, manuscript uniformity, no competing traditions, name connections to apostolic eyewitnesses. If names were added later, that event left no trace. No controversy, no disagreement, no record. That's not how legends behave. That's how preserved memory behaves. The simplest explanation is the traditional one. The early church knew who wrote these texts and transmitted those names faithfully. That's not blind faith. That's historical consistency. Thank you. God bless you. May the Lord Jesus Christ have mercy on all of us. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay, Shadi, whenever you're ready, your 5 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you, William, for spending your Monday night with me, and thank you to Chris. I'm grateful to you hosting this event. I'm going to start with Chris. Clearly doesn't understand what the historic method is. He clearly was referring and reading consistently from ChatGPT because he doesn't understand the historic method. He said one of the falsification criteria for him was geographic errors. And I brought him geographic errors and I brought him anachronisms to show him that it doesn't really go back to the authors, to the claimed authors by the church. Secondly, he said that uh, uh, we know that the church tradition is reliable, and I showed that church tradition is unreliable because Papias did not know the Gospel of Mark was written in order, did not know that the Gospel of Matthew is not a Logia tradition. It's not a sayings gospel like the Gospel of Thomas. It's actually an entire narrative with narrative material, and he did not know that it was written in Greek, not Hebrew. So the information that he's given us is mistaken. Authorship, the earliest authorship, again, just because we don't have it contested late, that doesn't mean that that's a reliable tradition. The earliest authorship claims, when we look at the manuscripts, P1 doesn't have a manuscript title. Again, Simon J. Gathercole, he said in his book about gospel titles that Codex Vercellenses is what it's called, did not have titles for Luke or John. So I showed that. Also, when we look at the Gentile self-identification verses that I brought, my opponent here, Chris, did not engage that at all, and he didn't even touch it. That shows clearly that they're writing to a Gentile audience, and they're talking in third person about themselves and about the Jewish law as if they're Gentiles. They say this is your law, that the Jews believe in the field of blood being named to this day. So they're talking about the Jews in third person. Gospel authors, they write about themselves in third person if they are the authors, which just shows that they are not really who the gospel authors are. And I showed the stages of the evolution of gospel titles, and he did not touch that at all. Uh, I already touched on the chain of Papias to Irenaeus and showed how weak that is. And Irenaeus just tells us that he saw Polycarp. He didn't even know Polycarp, didn't study under Polycarp. That's a debate for another topic. But he is copying Papias, and Papias is mistaken, clearly. He did not quote a single academic. I noticed that Chris didn't even bring a single academic to fortify and back his own position. And that just shows you how weak the argument is, because it's not respected within mainstream academia because of how weak it is. So that just shows us a disregard for academia and what expert historians think about the matter.
Argument from authority.
Kept using the word attribution. and the word attribution, he's misapplying what it actually means. The word attribution, when it comes to authorial titles or authorship, it just tells us that this is who we think the person is. This is just a guess. This is a shot in the dark. That doesn't mean that's who the real author is. I could say that my cell phone was authored or attributed to, I don't know, Bill Gates. That doesn't mean that Bill Gates built it. It could have been built by somebody else. So that's just a guess. This is a wild guess. What we know is from Justin Martyr and early church fathers like Aristides, uh, like Ignatius, and when we look at the Didache, is that these gospels are anonymous. Again, he did not bring any positive proof, any positive evidence at all, internally or externally, except the chain, which I have broken down and showed is weak. He did not bring any positive evidence. There's nothing in the Gospels that tells us those are the authors. There's nobody outside of Irenaeus or Papias that tells us so. And Papias, according to church fathers, is unreliable and is a simpleton, according to Eusebius Church History, Book 3. I think it is chapter 39. So look at that, look at the overall picture, and you'll see that this is just tradition. You could believe it if you want to, but objectively, that doesn't mean it has any meat and potatoes. It's just a very weak argument. With that, I yield my time.
Well, you didn't have to. It was right on time. Anyways, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. I know this is kind of a short debate, and we've been trying to put this together. And it is Monday night. I thank everybody else for being here. I know it's late. We all need to sleep. With that said, I'd like to thank both of my guests for being here.
Thanks for hosting us.
There were some good points that are made. I personally don't really have a meat to take in this debate, so we just leave. We did what we got to do, and we just leave the rest of the audience. Thank you for coming, and have a great day.
Thank you, brother. Hey, right on, man.
All right, guys.
Appreciate it, bro.
Yeah. Take care.
Bye, Sean.